Welcome to Module 2 in a structured series focused on coming back to oneself and understanding identity after emotional abuse. In the previous module, conditioning was examined as a central tool in narcissistic abuse, how individuals adapt psychologically in order to survive emotionally unsafe environments. This model builds on that foundation by examining how conditioning translates into the gradual erosion of identity. Rather than asking why individuals stayed or why they changed, this lecture focuses on how identity loss occurs slowly, incrementally, and often without any conscious awareness. So let's look at the myth. A common assumption about narcissistic abuse is that identity loss follows a dramatic turning point, maybe an argument, a betrayal, or it follows a clearly abusive event. However, clinical observation and survivor accounts suggest something much different. Most individuals don't lose themselves after a single moment. They lose themselves gradually through a series of reasonable adaptations that are made over a period of time. In many cases, the early stages of the relationship felt stabilizing rather than destabilizing. Emotional intensity may have been interpreted as a connection with the narcissist. Adaptability may have been framed as maturity. Accommodations may have been understood as love. Nothing about these early changes appeared dangerous. So let's look at incremental adjustment, because identity erosion typically begins with very small adjustments, and these adjustments are rarely framed as self-sacrifice. Instead, they're framed as compromise, flexibility, maybe patience, understanding even. An individual may choose to speak less about certain topics. They may soften emotional reactions. They may delay personal needs until a better time. Each adjustment considered independently appears pretty minor. It's in the accumulation that becomes costly. So let's look at the logic of accommodation. Accommodation in emotionally unsafe relationships often follows a consistent internal logic. Individuals learn through experience rather than instruction that certain expressions lead to tension or withdrawal, or maybe even conflict. So in response, they adjust. And this adjustment is not passive, it's strategic. The goal is usually preservation, preserving harmony, preserving connection, preserving emotional stability. And over time, accommodation becomes habitual. You like Lexa? Over time, accommodation becomes habitual rather than deliberate. The narrowing of expression, let's talk about. As accommodation continues, identity doesn't disappear, it narrows. Individuals may still hold opinions, of course, and their preferences and emotional responses internally, but they express them less frequently. And certain aspects of the self just become quieter. Others may recede entirely. This narrowing often occurs without conscious awareness. It feels less like loss and more like restraint. And over time, restraint becomes self-regulation. So what about the anticipation and the monitoring? A key turning point in identity erosion occurs when external control becomes internalized. So rather than reacting to conflict, individuals begin anticipating it. They monitor tone, language, and emotional expression preemptively. They adjust behavior before discomfort arises. And this internal monitoring reduces immediate conflict but increases long-term self-alienation. The individual is no longer responding only to the narcissist. They are responding to an internalized expectation. So what's the responsibility there? As this process continues, responsibility for relational tension is absorbed inward. Individuals may come to believe that they really are too sensitive, that they're too difficult, or they are the source of the instability. But this belief does not arise from self-criticism alone. It emerges from repeated patterns of emotional deflection and minimization. Over time, identity becomes organized around avoidance rather than expression. So many individuals report that they didn't notice the loss of self while it was happening. Awareness often comes later, maybe during a moment of unexpected clarity. And once they realize what's happening, it's often expressed as, I don't recognize myself anymore. I don't know what I want. I don't trust my reactions. And these statements do not indicate confusion alone. They reflect the delayed recognition of long-term adaptation. So why leaving doesn't immediately restore identity? It's important to clarify that physical separation from an abusive relationship does not instantly restore identity. Conditioning and identity erosion occur at the level of the nervous system as well as cognition. After leaving, individuals may feel disoriented, emotionally flat, uncertain, overwhelmed by choice. This is not evidence that leaving was a mistake. Be sure of that. It is evidence that the system is recalibrating. Identity recovery often lags behind physical safety. What is commonly described as losing oneself is more accurately understood as a series of adaptive decisions, each reasonable within its context. No single choice caused the loss. It was the repetition that mattered. Understanding this reframes identity erosion not as failure, but as survival. This module has focused on process rather than blame. Identity loss in narcissistic abuse does not occur because individuals are unaware or weak. It occurs because adaptation is gradual, reinforced, and often rewarded in the short term. In the next module, attention will be turned to what remains beneath this adaptation and how identity begins to resurface once safety is restored. Thank you so much for taking the time to work through Module 2. In Module 3, we'll look at how this erosion of identity begins to show up in daily behavior. Things like self-doubt, over-accommodating, the loss of inner authority, and how those patterns start to make sense once you see the larger picture. I'm Kyle Hackley, attorney, author of the book Undercurrent, and the host of the Are You Annie podcast. This educational series is here to help name patterns, offer clarity, and support your understanding, whether you're currently in the grip of a narcissist, have already left, or simply want to better understand narcissistic abuse with compassion. I look forward to seeing you in Module 3. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon. Bye.